Every unsolved case has two sides. There are the hard facts, and then there are the whispers, the little details that just don't add up, the moments that defy any logical explanation. What happens when a crime leads somewhere our rules no longer apply? We've all had that feeling, right? That prickle on your neck when you feel like you're being watched, or the chill in an empty room that doesn't feel quite empty. For the people in these stories, that feeling became a terrifying and final reality. Tonight, we're looking at that chilling place where true crime and the paranormal meet. We're going to explore real cases where the lines get so blurry, they leave investigators with questions that have no earthly answers, and they leave the rest of us with a deep, primal fear of the unknown. These are stories of unsolved murders and bizarre events that will make you question everything you thought you knew about the darkness in our world. Stories that will leave you feeling unsettled long after the screen goes dark. These are horror stories for an unsettling and eerie night. If you enjoy exploring the unknown and find yourself drawn to the mysteries in the shadows, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. You don't want to miss our future descents into the darkness. The Haunting of Hinterkaifeck, our first story, takes us to a lonely, isolated farmstead in Bavaria, Germany, way back in the spring of 1922. The farm was called Hinterkaifeck, which basically just means behind Kaifeck, a nearby hamlet. It was a place set apart from the world, sitting about a kilometer from its neighbors, with a dense, dark forest at its back. This was home to the Gruber family. The stern, 63-year-old patriarch, Andreas, and his 72-year-old wife, Cecilia. Living with them was their widowed daughter, 35-year-old Victoria, and her two young children, 7-year-old Cecilia and 2-year-old Joseph. The Grubers weren't exactly popular in the village. They kept to themselves, and dark rumors followed them, especially whispers of an incestuous relationship between Andreas and Victoria, a crime they'd actually been convicted of. This grim reputation just pushed them further into isolation, leaving them truly alone with whatever was starting to unfold inside their home. The horror at Hinterkaifeck didn't start on the night of the murders. It began slowly, with a series of quiet, strange events that built a creeping sense of dread. 6 months before the attack, the family's maid, Crescens Rieger, suddenly quit. She told people she just couldn't stay, claiming the house was haunted. She heard disembodied voices and footsteps echoing from the empty attic, sounds that convinced her something unseen was living in the house with them. Andreas, a practical man, probably brushed it off. But soon, even he couldn't ignore the strange things that started happening. In March of 1922, just weeks before the end, Andreas found a newspaper from Munich on his property. He couldn't remember buying it, and the postman said no one nearby subscribed to it. It was as if it had just appeared out of thin air. A few days later, he told a neighbor about something even more disturbing. In a fresh layer of snow, he found a set of footprints leading from the edge of the forest straight to the farmhouse. He followed them, his unease growing with every step. The tracks led to a locked door on the farm that now had a broken lock. But the most unsettling part was what he didn't find. There were no tracks leading away. Whatever came from the woods, it seemed to have stayed. The family's sense of being watched grew stronger. They started hearing noises from the attic again, the same phantom footsteps the old maid had described. Andreas grabbed a weapon and searched the loft, but he found nothing. No one was there. Around the same time, one of the house keys vanished. The feeling of being unsafe in their own home was now constant. The final person to join this doomed household was the new maid, 44-year-old Maria Baumgartner. Her first day on the job was March 31st, 1922. She arrived in the afternoon. She would be dead within hours, the last victim in a chain of events that still makes no sense. For 4 days, a strange silence fell over Hinterkaifeck. Little Cecilia missed school. The family missed Sunday church, which was unheard of. The mail started piling up, a sure sign that something was terribly wrong. On April 4th, a group of neighbors, led by a man named Lorenz Schlittenbauer, decided to check on them. They found the farm eerily quiet and the doors locked, so they went to the barn. What they discovered inside was a scene of absolute horror. Lying in the hay were the bodies of Andreas and Kazilia Gruber, their daughter Victoria, and their granddaughter, young Kazilia. They had been brutally murdered, struck down by vicious blows to the head from a farm tool called a mattock. It was a slaughterhouse. Entering the house, the men found the rest of the family. The new maid, Maria, was dead in her room, and in his cot lay little 2-year-old Joseph, also killed with the same horrifying weapon. The investigation was a mess from the start, contaminated by the well-meaning neighbors. But as the Munich police dug in, a stranger, more disturbing picture emerged. The evidence suggested that whoever did this hadn't fled. They had stayed. For days after the killings, neighbors saw smoke rising from the chimney. The cattle had been fed, and the family dog had been taken care of. Food had been eaten from the kitchen. The killer or killers had lived on the farm with the bodies of their victims for possibly up to 3 days. This detail transforms the case from a brutal murder into something monstrous. It points to a killer with no panic, no fear, and a chilling comfort inside the home they had just destroyed. The lead theory is as terrifying as the crime itself. Investigators believe the killer had been hiding in the farm's attic for days, maybe even longer. This would explain the footsteps, the sounds Andreas heard, the single set of tracks in the snow. They had been living with the Grubers, a silent, unseen guest, just watching and waiting. The theory goes that on the night of March 31st, the killer lured the family, one by one, into the barn. Andreas first, then his wife, then Victoria, and finally 7-year-old Kazilia. He killed each of them with the mattock before they could scream for help. Then, he went inside to murder Maria and the sleeping toddler, Joseph. An autopsy on young Kazilia revealed a truly horrific detail. She had torn out her own hair, suggesting she'd survived the initial attack for hours, lying in agony and terror in the dark barn before she finally died. Over the years, more than 100 suspects were questioned, but no one was ever charged. Some suspected Lorenz Schlittenbauer, the neighbor who found the bodies. He was rumored to be Joseph's real father and had a rocky relationship with Victoria. Another theory focused on Victoria's husband, Karl Gabriel, who was supposedly killed in World War I. His body was never found, leading to speculation that he had survived, returned to find his wife had a child with another man, or her own father, and took a terrible revenge. In 2007, a German police academy reviewed the cold case and concluded it would likely never be solved due to the loss of evidence. They did, however, say they agreed on a prime suspect but wouldn't name them out of respect for living relatives. The Hinterkaifeck farmstead was torn down a year after the murders, wiped from the landscape as if to erase the memory. But the story lingers, a perfect, terrifying mix of true crime and the paranormal. Was it just a brutal crime of passion or greed? Or was the former made right? Was the house itself haunted, drawing something terrible from the woods? The footsteps in the attic, the newspaper from nowhere, the tracks in the snow with no return path. These are the whispers that turn a tragic murder into a true horror story. While the horror at Hinterkaifeck was rooted in the dark soil of a German farm, our next story takes us to the skies. It's a case where the line between a missing person and a truly bizarre encounter gets hopelessly, terrifyingly blurred. It's a story told not by witnesses on the ground, but through the final, panicked words of a pilot, broadcasting over the radio as he flew straight into oblivion. The disappearance of Frederick Valentik on the evening of October 21, 1978. A 20-year-old pilot named Frederick Valentik was getting ready for what should have been a routine flight. He was young, with about 150 hours of flying time, and loved aviation. That evening, he rented a single-engine Cessna 182L from an airport near Melbourne, Australia. His plan was simple: fly over the Bay Strait to King Island to pick up some passengers, or maybe some crayfish. He told people different things. It was his first time flying at night over open water. At 6:19 p.m., Valentik took off. The weather was perfect. Visibility was excellent. He flew along the coast before heading out over the dark waters of the Bay Strait. For about 45 minutes, everything was normal. Then, At 7:06 p.m., Valentik keyed his mic and called Melbourne Air Traffic Control. His voice was calm, but his message was weird. "Melbourne, this is Delta Sierra Juliet," he said. "Is there any known traffic below 5,000? The controller, Steve Roby, checked his radar. "Delta Sierra Juliet, no known traffic," he replied. Valentik responded, "IM. Seems to be a large aircraft below 5,000. This was the first sign something was wrong. There shouldn't have been any other aircraft out here." Roby confirmed again, "No traffic." Valentik then asked, "What sort of aircraft is it?" Roby had to tell him again. He couldn't identify something that wasn't there. A few moments passed. Then Valentik came back on the radio. "It's got 4 bright. It seems to me like landing lights." He said the object flew about 1,000 feet over his head at incredible speed. Then, he reported it was coming at him again. You can hear the tone in his voice begin to shift from curious to concerned. "It seems to me that he's playing some sort of game," he told the controller. "He's flying over me at speeds I could not identify." The whole exchange got stranger and stranger. Valentik confirmed he was at 4,500 feet. Then he described the object. "And the thing is just orbiting on top of me also. It's got a green light and sort of metallic-like. It's all shiny on the outside. A shiny, metallic object with a green light, toying with his small plane over the dark ocean." Suddenly, Valentik's calm shattered. "It's just vanished," he said, bewildered. "A moment of relief, maybe, but then it came back. Now approaching from the southwest," he reported, the stress in his voice now obvious. He started reporting that his engine was failing. "The engine is rough idling, and the thing is coughing." The air traffic controller tried to keep him focused. He asked Valentik for his intentions. His reply is the most haunting part of the entire transmission. He started to say, "My intentions are to go to King Island. Melbourne. That strange aircraft is hovering on top of me again." There was a short pause, and then his last, chilling words were broadcast. "It is hovering, and it's not an aircraft." Right after that, the transmission was cut off, replaced by 17 seconds of a harsh, scraping, metallic sound. Then silence. Roby tried again and again to make contact, but there was no reply. Frederick Valentik and his Cessna had vanished. A massive air and sea search was launched, but they found nothing. Not a single piece of wreckage, no oil slick, no sign of what happened in those last terrifying moments. The official report basically concluded they had no idea what happened to the plane. So what happened? Skeptics think Valentik, an inexperienced pilot, became disoriented and entered a graveyard spiral, losing his sense of direction, seeing his own lights reflected in the water and mistaking them for another craft. But aviation experts point out that his type of plane makes flying upside down for any length of time almost impossible. Others say he was just seeing bright planets like Venus or Jupiter, but it seems unlikely a trained pilot would make that mistake, especially with how he described the object's movements. Of course, the most popular theory is the one Valentik himself seemed to land on. After his disappearance, several people came forward claiming to have seen strange lights in the sky that same night, in the same area. One group even said they saw a plane like a Cessna in a steep dive with a large, green-lit object hovering right above it. These accounts, plus Valentik's own words, paint a picture of an encounter with something not from this world. His final, stark conclusion, "It's not an aircraft," feels like a moment of terrible realization. And what about those last 17 seconds of metallic, scraping sounds? Was that his plane breaking apart? Or was it something more sinister, as some have suggested, the sound of his aircraft being intercepted? The disappearance of Frederick Valentik is a perfect storm of creepy evidence and zero answers. We're left with just a recording of a young man's voice, going from calm to terrified as he describes his encounter with the unknown, right before he disappeared from the face of the earth. These are the kinds of mysteries that get under your skin, the kind that make you look a little closer at the shadows. If you're finding these stories as unsettling and fascinating as we do, take a moment to like this video. It helps us continue to bring these strange and dark tales into the light. Now, our final story takes us deep into the wilderness, where a child's game of hide-and-seek turns into one of America's most baffling and disturbing unsolved disappearances. The disappearance of Dennis Martin. The Great Smoky Mountains National Park is a place of breathtaking beauty and a vast, unforgiving wilderness. Its steep ravines and unpredictable weather have claimed many who've underestimated its power. But no case is more perplexing or more haunting than the disappearance of 6-year-old Dennis Lloyd Martin in the summer of 1969. It was Father's Day weekend, and the Martin family was on their annual camping trip. Dennis was there with his father, William, his grandfather, and his 9-year-old brother, Douglas. On Saturday, June 14th, the family hiked to a scenic meadow called Spence Field, a beautiful but remote spot. They met another family there, and the kids started to play. Around 4:30 in the afternoon, the 4 boys decided to play a prank on the adults and sneak up on them from different directions. The older boys told Dennis, who was wearing a bright red t-shirt, to go a separate way so his shirt wouldn't give them away. His father, William Martin, watched his son playfully duck behind a nearby bush. It was the last time anyone would ever see him. A few minutes later, the other boys jumped out, laughing. But Dennis wasn't with them. The minutes stretched into a thick, heavy dread. William called his son's name. Nothing. He walked to the bush where he'd last seen Dennis, but the boy was gone. Panic set in. William frantically searched the area, then ran 2 miles down the trail, thinking Dennis had wandered off. But there was no sign of the little boy in the red shirt. Hours passed. They knew they needed help. Dennis's grandfather made the long 9-mile trek to the nearest ranger station to report him missing. What followed was the largest search in the history of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Over the next few weeks, more than 1,400 people joined the effort. But the search was doomed from the start. Just hours after Dennis vanished, a massive thunderstorm hit, dumping almost 3 inches of rain on the area. The storm washed away any possible tracks, flooded creeks, and turned trails to mud. The temperature on the mountain dropped to around 50 degrees Fahrenheit, 10 degrees Celsius, incredibly dangerous for a small child with no shelter. Despite the massive search, which included park rangers, the FBI, and even elite Green Berets, not a single piece of evidence of Dennis Martin was ever found. No clothing, no shoes, not a trace. It was as if the forest had simply swallowed him. The official theory is that Dennis simply wandered off, got lost, and died from exposure. The terrain is treacherous, and it's possible his body was hidden in a ravine or taken by a black bear. But his father, William, never believed that. He and many others thought something far more sinister happened. The strangeness is in the details that don't fit the lost child story. One of the most unsettling accounts came from another family, the Keys, who were hiking about 7 miles away from Spence Field that same afternoon. They reported hearing an enormous, sickening scream. A few moments later, they saw a rough-looking man moving quickly through the woods, carrying something over his shoulder. When the Key family heard about the missing boy, they immediately called the authorities. The FBI, however, mostly dismissed their report, thinking it was impossible for someone to carry a child that far, that fast, through such rugged terrain. The involvement of the Green Berets also added a layer of mystery. Their operation was highly secretive, running parallel to the main search but not communicating with the park rangers. This led to speculation that they weren't just there to find a lost boy. Local Appalachian folklore talks about feral people living deep in the mountains, and some theories suggest Dennis was abducted by one of these wild men. And the Green Berets were sent in not for a rescue, but for an extermination. There were other strange clues. A set of child-sized footprints, one bare, one with a shoe matching what Dennis wore, were found leading to a stream, which is where search dogs also tracked his scent before it went cold. The Park Service dismissed the prints, but the claim was disputed. Years later, an illegal ginseng hunter came forward, claiming he'd found the scattered skeleton of a small child in an area about 3 miles from where Dennis was last seen. He admitted he hadn't reported it at the time because he was afraid of getting arrested for poaching. A search of the area was conducted, but after so many years, nothing was found. The disappearance of Dennis Martin is a classic case in the phenomenon known as Missing 411, a term used to describe clusters of mysterious disappearances in national parks that share strange, unsettling similarities. These cases often involve kids or the elderly, who vanish in an instant with people nearby. The weather often turns bad right after, destroying evidence. And in many cases, absolutely nothing is ever found. Dennis Martin's case ticks every single box. He vanished in minutes while his family was just yards away. A massive storm hit. The largest search in the park's history found nothing. The side stories, the scream, the strange man, the secret military mission, all point to a story far darker than a lost little boy. He stepped behind a bush to play a game and walked into a mystery that has lasted for over 50 years. From a haunted farm in Germany, to a strange encounter in the Australian sky, to a silent disappearance in the American wilderness. These stories all share a chilling, common thread. They live in that gray area between what we know and what we fear. They're cases where the evidence doesn't lead to a conclusion, but to a void. A black hole of information where logic just breaks down and the imagination runs wild with terrifying ideas. The perpetrators, if they were human, were like ghosts, leaving no trace. The phenomena, if they were paranormal, offer no answers. They remain open wounds, reminders that there are still corners of our world that are profoundly dark and deeply unknown. They force us to wonder if the line between true crime and the paranormal is really a line at all, or just a blurry, terrifying threshold that can be crossed in a heartbeat. What do you think is lurking in the shadows where these worlds meet? Are these just unsolved crimes with bizarre coincidences? Or are they evidence of something more? Share your theories in the comments below. The darkness is full of stories waiting to be told. If you want to keep exploring them with us, please subscribe and turn on notifications. Thanks for joining us on this unsettling and eerie night. Watch your back.